So hi, thanks for tuning into the Leadership Detectives. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that's, we're trying to decide whether to actually record it or not, because it is quite a controversial topic. It's about racism in the workplace and leaders dealing with prejudice around racism in the workplace. But we decided it was so important we needed to record it, talk about it, especially given Albert's personal experience in the workplace. And we look at different aspects of what's happening today, some of the facts around what's happening today, and some advice and thoughts on how leaders could and should deal with this very important topic. Anyway, we'd love to hear your comments, love to get your feedback on this topic specifically because it's so important. But please subscribe, please give us a thumbs up, and we hope you enjoy it. So let's jump straight in. I'm alive.
Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone. Good to see you back here on our leadership Zoomcast. I think we talked before, actually, we're going to be branding this, so you're going to be seeing a new name coming out around that, but let's talk about that a little bit later. Neil, good afternoon. How are you? You well?
I'm fantastic. Thank you, mate. Absolutely great. I'm in my last day of quarantine, so I'm free tomorrow to go out and get infected by the rest of the UK. So,
so I guess your week's been kind of limited in terms of what you've been doing, right? You've been out and about, or you've been out, you stuck in home?
No, I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. So I've had an interesting week, right? I've been out. I've been with my parents to help them with some stuff. I've been with my godson, but my godson's about to head off to be training as a para in the British Army. So that's about to happen. Bit of exercise time for myself. So, and the weekend, we got bank holiday weekend, right? So what's the plans?
Family, lots of family this weekend. Yeah, they're all coming around at different points during the week because we haven't seen them for ages because we got back from France, went into quarantine. So they're back. So no, looking forward to seeing everyone.
Good stuff.
And looking forward to discussing this topic. Actually, before I get onto that, I just want to mention to people, please subscribe down below if you want to be notified of other videos that are coming out that we're bringing out every week. So please subscribe below, give us a thumbs up, click the bell as well, just so that you get notified whenever did that sound like professional? That sounded like a YouTuber. For a second.
It did actually. You've been obviously practicing.
Anyway, this topic today is a really interesting one because, and it's I guess it's kind of controversial, but it's an important topic to discuss, and it came about because Albert and I were having a conversation a little while ago, and it all started around when the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, unfortunate death happened. So the topic we wanted to talk about today was how should leaders deal with racial prejudice in the workplace? And what was fascinating, when Albert and I started talking about this, I said to Albert, when this was all going on with it, I said, do you know, it's the first time I've really thought about or talked about the fact that you're not white. And over 35 years of knowing you, I've never, ever come to that thought in my head that you're not white.
We have spoken about your attention to detail and observation skills.
So I thought it was a strange conversation to have because I can't talk about it from my perspective because obviously I'm not of an ethnic minority. But what it would be useful to share. What's your experience, Albert, of being a coloured man in the workplace? You know, over the years.
It's interesting. So you know, as Neil says, right, this came about purely as a conversation. Then we said maybe there's something here and when we look at it from my own perspective, so I was at school during the 70s, and I started working in you know the 80s and on from there. My life in school, I was very conscious of my colour, and it was aggressive, right? I mean, you know, I lived in the time of skinheads and all of those things, right? So yeah, I felt the brunt of that. Having come to the workplace, I could say my first job, I was a trainee apprentice in an engineering workshop. Was I aware of my colour there? Yeah, I was made very aware of my colour in that environment, right? But what I would say is the major part of my job was spent in, you know, in IBM. I don't mind stating that as a company. I spent 31 years there.
Yeah.
And in all the time that I was there, there was only ever one person that was responsible for me feeling about my color or my ethnic background. The rest of that 31 years, I never did at all. From the time I was a professional, a manager, an executive, never.
So before we come on to that situation, because I'd like to talk about it because I was actually there when it happened.
Yeah.
But do you think that's because you didn't notice because you'd grown up in a culture that, we grew up in the 70s and 80s. And if you think about, some of the TV programs that were around at the time, racism was around, the Sweeney, some of the shows on television where people were blacking up their faces, whether it was comedy or,
Goodness
shows on...
Gracious Me. Do you remember Goodness Gracious Me?
Goodness Gracious Me, right.
Remember Love Thy Neighbour?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, love them on the buses, all of that. Right, so we grew up in that environment where it was kind of a joke. It was kind of okay, although it wasn't okay. It was thought to be okay.
Yeah.
So do you think you didn't notice it, or do you think it just wasn't there?
I think it wasn't there because I didn't spend all my life at work, right? So at the times that I was down the pub, or the times I was at the gym, or the times that I was somewhere else, did I notice it there? Yeah, it was still there. Right. It was still there, but I didn't notice it in the workplace. Now, I think part of that, by the way, is that it was the culture of the company, right? That the culture of the company was accepting of people of all backgrounds, etc., etc. And I think IBM was a company that was leading the way in some of that environment. Now, I'm not saying that others weren't as well. So I think that was the case. I will tell you, though, that right from day one, my job was a field job. So I was out fixing machines in the field.
Yeah.
Guess what? My territory was Southwest and West London, right? Did I notice it when somebody who was running their office from their house in Kensington opened the front door and looked horrified to see me standing on the doorstep, right? And said, oh, gosh, Mr. Joseph was going to call. And I said, yeah, I'm Mr. Joseph. So that's the only times that I noticed it was from customers that were surprised, having spoken to me on the phone, having seen my name, didn't expect somebody of my appearance to be calling at their home.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. I hadn't thought about this, and we didn't talk about this in the prep, but I just remember the situation when I was an engineer. So I had Southeast One. Southeast One was very Afro-Caribbean, on Kent Road, all of that area, Elephant and Castle. And I went into a room full of women that were data entry into punch cards. And I had to do this regularly. And I had to do this walk of death from one end of the room to the other end of the room, because there was a supervisor sitting at the end of the room. And I used to walk from one end of the room to the other end of the room. And I remember one time walking in there, and literally everyone in the room was Afro-Caribbean, was black, apart from me. And I remember feeling incredibly conscious. And then someone shouted out, "Look, some fresh white arse for us, ladies." and it was just, and I guess I hadn't thought about it until now, actually. That was, I felt really, really, I couldn't get out of there quick enough. That was scary. So tell us about the situation where you had racism against you in the workplace.
So that situation was, it was actually my own boss, right? So at the point in time, I was a senior manager. My own boss, we'd run an event, and in this event, he was up on stage. I was at the back of the room because I was part of the organising committee to make the event work. And he couldn't see me, and he looked down and he said, "Is Albert out there?" And I put my hand up and he said, "Oh, I didn't see you at the back there. It's very dark back there." I took nothing from that, right? I kind of carried on. But I did go up to him and say, just be careful making comments like that, because there are people of my appearance also in the audience and they might not take well to that. And he said, "I don't know what the problem is." I said, "I'm just telling you, be aware of that." And we moved on. Nothing more happened.
Yeah.
Another time, a few weeks later, we were interviewing somebody for jobs. So 2 people he interviewed in the building that we worked in. The building was divided up by colour. So he phoned me and he said, "Are you in the building?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Could you second interview these two guys for me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in the purple area." He said, "Oh, fancy that. I thought you'd be in the black area." So I said, "Well, send them round." So he sent them round. I interviewed these two guys. I went round and saw him and I said, "When you had that conversation with me on the phone about being in the black area, where were those two guys?" And he said, "Oh, they were standing in front of me." I said, "So you made that comment to me and then expected me to interview these guys with authority and dignity after what you just said to me?
Yeah,
I said,
yeah.
don't ever do that again." Right? And then it had to come to a head, Neil, right? Because
so
now,
how did you deal with it? So if you're going to give advice to someone who's had that happen to them in the work, but how did you deal with it?
in the end, I had to tackle it directly, and I involved HR as well.
Right. Okay.
Because the third incident that happened was the final straw for me, in that he was leaving the building to go back to his home. He needed to pick up a plane at Heathrow. He had 2 bags and a laptop. So I grabbed one of his bags and said, "Come on, I'll give you a hand, get this down to the car." We got down to the car. I handed his bag across to the driver and he said, "This is Albert. He's my own personal punkawalla." So at that point I said, "Take your bag, get on your flight, check your email when you get back." And he said, "What?" I said, "Check your email when you get back." Mm. When I got upstairs, I wrote an email to him saying, "Enough is enough. The comments you've made are racist, they're inappropriate, and I no longer will tolerate it. I will now be reporting to HR the situation that we've got, and we will now handle everything formally from here on in." Right? And it went that formally. So look, you have to tackle it at some point, guys. Was I fair to let it go? Was it just his response to me, by the way, was the part of the world that he grew up in? It's just fun. It's just banter. I don't mean anything by it. It's not meant to offend. And I said, well, in the training that I've done, what I understood was it's not your intention that counts. It's how I receive it that counts. And if I receive it badly, and I tell you I've received it badly, then you've made a mistake.
So, what's interesting was I was in the audience when you were at the back of the audience. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about how you receive it. It's about how the rest of the business receives it as well. Because mm-hmm. everyone in the room felt uncomfortable about that comment.
Yeah.
Everyone felt uncomfortable about it. No one's laughed. Everyone just squirmed about that comment. So a leader who is making racial comments it makes not just the person they're talking to feel uncomfortable, but the whole business feel uncomfortable. Sure. So that's So have you ever experienced, as any other, have you had any detriment of, being Indian in the workplace?
No, I don't think so. I think, look, if anything, was it even on my mind? I never even thought about it. I tell you what I thought about more, Neil. 2 things, right? One that I thought about more was the fact that I'm short. Yeah. So,
no.
Yeah, apparently I am, right? So did that bother me? I probably cared more about the fact that I wasn't tall. By the way, guys, for those of you that don't know me, I'm not that small. I'm 5'6", right? But hey, against some people, I'm even small. I probably cared more about the fact that I don't know or care about football, right? And you'd always be in environments where guys are talking about football and what happened and who scored what and who sold which player. And I don't, with the greatest respect to people who love football, I don't, right? I love Formula One, I love golf, I love rugby. I don't care about football. And I've got a group of mates that know I don't care about football, so they do that bit. But you could feel excluded, right? So, the topic here, whilst we talk about racism, is as much about inclusiveness and it's about diversity.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to think about.
And we could expand it out to be about diversity. And I think that would be quite a long conversation. And maybe we do one on different types of diversity going forward.
Yeah.
And so I guess one other question for you. Did it give you any advantage?
I don't personally think it did, but it was quite interesting, right? I'll tell you that when I was going through promotion and you and I got to a good senior level in the company, right? We enjoyed a good career there. But whilst I was looking at one of my promotions, which was to get to vice president, I talked to my mentor and my sponsor. And he said to me, have you completed your profile online? I said, yeah, it's all done. And he said, and he's of ethnic background, by the way. And he said, what did you put in the category where it asks about your ethnicity? And I said, I think I just put British. What, you didn't put Asian British? And I said, no. And he said, go back in and change it. I said, why? And he said, it might make a difference.
Mm.
Now, I didn't go back in and change it, and I got promoted to vice president, right? So I'm okay with that. It would have bugged me, Neil, that if I did go in and change it, and that's why I got promoted to vice president, that I would have felt that that was wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
So did I ever use it to my advantage? No, because I didn't think it would be an advantage. I just didn't think about it. I just didn't think about it.
Mm. And by the way, and I didn't think about the fact that you were Indian either, you know, so
yeah.
And I think that you're probably right, that was the culture we were in. But it is I just thought it'd be useful to ask you those questions, because I've never asked them before. So knowing we were going to do this topic, I wondered whether there is a problem. What kind of problem do leaders need to address in the workplace?
Mm-hmm.
So I went and had a look on the government websites this morning. There's lots of information about ethnicity in the workspace.
Yeah.
There's lots of stuff. So let me just rattle through a couple of stats that I found, which I thought were really, really interesting. So if you take each ethnic group as a total and then look at the percentage that are, this breaks it down in each of these categories into percentages. So the percentage of non-white people that are employed
mm-hmm.
is 70 to 75%. Okay. The percentage of white people that are employed is 76%. So of that population, it's about the same. So employment percentage is about the same. I thought there might be higher unemployment in, say, Afro-Caribbean communities, but there isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I looked at the stats from 2004 to 2018. It's pretty consistent, slightly increased as we've got more people employed in general. Then I thought, okay, so let's have a look. So maybe people of ethnicity are employed in lower salary bands.
Mm-hmm.
I had a look at that, and that was fascinating. So I went to the higher end of the scale and looked at £1,000 a week or more. So the higher end of the scale, to see what percentage of the population was in there. And this broke down into 4 categories. So of Afro-Caribbean black population, 19% are earning £1,000 a week or higher.
Mm-hmm.
Pakistani Bangladeshi was 20% or 20%. British white or white was 26%.
Mm-hmm.
Indian was 42%. So
wow.
42% of the Indian population is earning £1,000 a week or more.
Wow.
Right, and that was a 2017 stat. So then I looked, okay, so maybe we've got a boardroom that's all white in the UK. So looking at people in senior positions, you know, the boardroom mainly white. So black Afro-Caribbean make up 5% of their population, make up boardroom members. Pakistani Bangladeshi, which are put together, is 8%.
Mm-hmm.
Indian is 11%, and white is 11% of that population, of that ethnic population. So you could say that Afro-Caribbean people are not represented as balanced on boards as a percentage of the population. And then the final thing I looked at, so far, apart from that one issue, I've not identified a problem yet. So the final thing I looked at was, okay, let's look at professional jobs: lawyers, solicitors, doctors, accountants. So Pakistani Bangladeshi population, 18% are in those type of jobs. White people, 20%. Black Afro-Caribbean, 21%. And Indian, 33%. So again, it's pretty balanced. If anything, there are more Indian people who are earning more and in more professional roles than there are other ethnic colours or backgrounds. So I think, I'm going, is there a problem? so it doesn't appear there's a problem in the role that people have, the money they're earning, the fact that they're employed. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, those stats?
No, you're right. So that, I'd say it's surprising. It's probably not surprising around the Indian piece because, yeah, if we take, without stereotyping, if we take doctors, lawyers, and so on, yeah, you do get a lot of Indian community in that. But what is surprising is there isn't an obvious issue in those stats, right? Because I would have expected it to be significantly worse of an imbalance from what we hear about. But maybe what we hear about in the marketplace is not about are the right jobs, sorry, are enough people, is the diversity of the workforce correct enough? Maybe what we're hearing about is how people feel, or about how people are being treated. Maybe it's a different thing, which is a bit hard to capture on paper, right?
Yeah, and that I think is, so are people being disadvantaged because of their ethnicity? It doesn't appear so.
No.
You know, on the stats that we've pulled up there. And by the way, I looked at the US as well. And although the employment level is around 60% rather than 75%, pretty much across the board, the stats are similar. Hispanic comes in a lot more than Indian in the US, but it's very similar.
Yeah.
So it doesn't appear that people are disadvantaged, but yeah, as you say, do they feel differently? Do they feel like they're treated differently?
Yeah.
And the only way I can answer that is by asking you, because of that's why we started this conversation off.
Yeah, and I guess the problem is probably twofold here. One, maybe I'm not as current as I should be now, right? So, you know, I left IBM in 2015, and I've worked at a couple of places since, so I've got some experience there. In fact, that's interesting because do I feel in anything that I did since I left IBM that there was any level of racial prejudice in any way? It's interesting. I went for a role as a consultancy role. It was a short-term consultancy role, and I was called up by somebody that I knew from IBM who was in South Africa. He was an executive in South Africa. He'd bought a company here in the UK and asked if I could go in and give him a hand with things that need to be done in there. He knew my background, he knew of me, and he said, I think you're perfect to go in and help with what I need here. So I've said, great, what would you like to do as a next step? Well, let's have a look at it. And he said, meet with a couple of my guys, talk to them, let them talk to you about what we could do, and then we can go from there. I said, okay, that's fine. And I went along to this hotel in London, and what was absolutely evident, Neil, when I met these two guys in the reception of this hotel was the guy who'd asked me to go and talk to them had not prepared them for what my appearance may have been.
Right.
Because it was dead obvious on their face that they weren't expecting to meet the Albert Joseph that they'd just seen. Right?
Yeah.
Now, what I felt about that conversation was that the conversation that went on after that felt very academic. It felt very, let's just go through the motions. I mean, you and I know people, right? And we've been through this, we understand behaviors. It felt very much like this was just going to go through the motions to tick the box at the end. I spoke to the guy who wanted me to join him 2 days later, and he said, well, they didn't feel that you had the right skills. I said, well, that's interesting because we didn't talk about my skills at all. So the questions we talked about, it'd be interesting to see how they determined anything. He said, well, look, the net is I don't think we'll go forward with this. And I said, that's interesting. You went from 100% you thought it was me through to we'll just walk away from this. And I said, I'm gonna offer something to you and you can do with it what you want. I think my colour didn't suit what they wanted.
Yeah.
And he said, it would be wrong if we talked about this outside of this conversation. But he said, I agree with you. I said, no, that's frightening. And he said, yeah, but you know, in South Africa, sometimes that's just the way. White South Africans, and this is his words, not mine, white South Africans have a point of view and you can't get beyond it.
And what's interesting is he's a black guy.
He's a black guy, right?
Yeah.
He's the boss, by the way, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things he said was, I get the feeling they were a bit concerned I was bringing in one of mine. And I said, I don't know what that means. Does that mean as ex-IBMers? And he said, let's leave it. Let's just leave it.
Yeah, okay.
So that's interesting because, again, it was outside of IBM, but so it still exists. But I don't know that speaking to me is just enough. And maybe what we need to do, Neil, is maybe we need a number of other people in the other ethnicity categories to join us in a conversation. I mean, we hadn't talked about this, right? But maybe that's what we need to do.
Absolutely, and also all other diversities.
Yeah.
We definitely need to do something about women in business as well, but we're not the best people to do that, so we'll have to get someone along to talk about that. But on this, in terms of our leadership detectives and helping people and the clues around this, so we've talked about it as an issue. We've talked about, well, is there an issue or isn't there an issue? But I think it's probably worth looking at two things. One of them is, what value does ethnicity, I can't say it now,
well, we know
having ethnic diversity bring to the workplace?
Yeah.
And how should leaders deal with any kind of racism they might see in the workplace? So if we deal with the first one first, what do you think is the value of having a good, diverse ethnic team around you?
Well, I think with that diversity, you were talking about different people, different cultures, different backgrounds, appreciation of different things. And without, again, stereotyping, certain cultures have certain ways of behaving, whether it's how they recognize their family or how they work with that family, how they treat friends, what kind of sports they follow, what kind of news they enjoy, all of those things. So if you're creating a team, wouldn't you want the widest, deepest richness in that team?
Yeah.
Or would you like everybody that thought the same, acted the same, and did the same? So for me, the diversity, regardless of color, religion, creed, whatever, it's the mixture that it brings, and it's the alternative views. How many times have we been in a meeting where 80% of us say, yeah, that's a really good action, I really like that, I think we should do that, let's go ahead. And then somebody says, hang on a minute, I've just thought of something here. What if blah, blah, blah? And we all kind of go, ooh, eureka moment, you're right. Hadn't thought of that. And we do something completely different than 80% of us would have done, because someone had a different point of view. And often different points of view comes from different diversity. I
agree with you. So they're correct. So different backgrounds, different upbringings, so that there's definite advantage to having that broader view.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we talked about this as we were preparing for this is if you haven't got that ethnic diversity, are you attracting the best talent? Because if you've got an all-white team and you're inviting someone for interview who isn't white, how are they going to feel about being the first non-white person joining that team?
Yeah.
So are you missing out on talent that could really add value to your business or to your team by not having that diversity of ethnic people in your team?
Absolutely agree with you. And you know what? If you're running a business, there's a serious danger. You've probably got clients. And if you've got clients, are you telling me all your clients are of exactly the same background, diversity, ethnicity, culture? Are you telling me all of your customers come from one area and walk of life? I doubt it. So are you missing being able to connect with those customers in the way that you need to, because you've got people in your business that help you connect with those customers? So all round, it makes absolute sense to have as wide diversity as you can, right?
Yeah, and so I think there are three things there we've just said. So one of them is make sure you've got the full cultural background. That's a real advantage. Making sure you're attracting the best talent and making sure you're engaging with customers and making them feel comfortable with your diversity as well. So racism in the workplace then, what would your recommendation be to leaders on dealing with any kind of racism they might see in the workplace?
I think the first thing is you've got to tackle it, right? You've got to tackle it. Now, I would say it depends what kind of racism you're talking about. But let's take the individual that I mentioned and the way that I was treated there. Had I gone to that person's boss, I would have expected that boss to sit them down and to understand, because the person I'm talking about was so blatant, he wouldn't have denied any of it. He'd have said, I didn't mean anything by it. So you've got to tackle the topic, right? Don't ignore it, and don't ignore it thinking maybe it will go away, because what you may have seen or experienced might only be the tip of the iceberg. It might be a lot worse going on elsewhere. So you've got to tackle it. That would be my first point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so tackle it with the individual. And if you need to get HR involved, you know, if it's bad enough and you need to get HR to get HR involved.
But what we're talking about there, Neil, I guess, is dealing with something, maybe the wrong phraseology, but we're dealing with something in wartime. Why not deal with something in peacetime? Right? So
what would your recommendation be about that?
Make sure it's a dialogue. Make sure it's an open topic. Make sure it's not an off the agenda topic. Make sure it's not a taboo topic. It's just a topic, right? It's making sure that people all feel comfortable to have the conversation, right?
And it's interesting, actually. There were two examples I saw when the George Floyd situation happened and the Black Lives Matter movement was the protests and stuff were going on. One of them was BlackRock. I know someone who works there, and what BlackRock did was they got a black employee to talk about what it's like being a black person in the City of London in finance, and a Q&A. So they got to answer questions and help understand what it's like to basically help people understand what it's like being a black person in that world. And that was one thing I thought sounded really good, and the feedback was good. The second thing I saw was with someone I work with, got a small team, 8-10 people, and one of them is Afro-Caribbean. And they just, this was all going on, they just had a conversation. Let's have a conversation about Black Lives Matter, and let's just all share our opinions. Let's just all share our thoughts and get input from everybody, including obviously the guy who was black in the team.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's fascinating. You know, we've talked so much about this in all of these conversations we've had, that communication is key to great leadership.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we're talking about again, is just enabling that communication.
Yeah. Because I think the other thing around it is, as long as that communication is going on and it's just a normal conversation, then people don't feel uncomfortable having it. But if it's like it's got to be special topic on the agenda today, let's talk about racism, it's artificial, right? It needs to be I'm not trying to make it trite. It needs to be as simple as, do you want a coffee? Let's talk about racism, right? It's the same thing. It's just part of the dynamic that if you get right can work really well. And if there's an issue, you've got to tackle. It's the same as you and I talking again, Neil, right? About having difficult conversations. This would be a difficult conversation to have, right?
Yeah.
But you need to have that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's almost just let's talk about diversity. Let's talk about how we feel. You know, it's a broad conversation. You're right. It's not just about racism. It's about inclusivity.
Yeah. I've just thought, actually, we jumped ahead and I wasn't fair to you there, actually, because you asked me what my experience was of being somebody of colour coming through in my career and working in a company. What was your experience of seeing that situation? Did you see situations where people of colour were treated differently, better, worse, or not?
I don't think I did, because I wasn't looking for it. And also most of my early career where I would have noticed it, I think, was I was in Southeast London. So actually I was probably in the minority in terms of the colour of my skin, it being in that area. As I was a leader and when I went into leadership, do you know, I was thinking earlier, I was trying to think of people of ethnic backgrounds that I had in my teams. And I found it really difficult because they were just part of my team.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't think about what colour they were.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have done. But no, I didn't notice it, is the honest answer.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't looking for it.
It's funny you say about teams, right? And I know we've got the clock ticking, but this is a good topic, right? So let's keep going. I've just suddenly thought of an example that happened in my career.
Yeah.
Where one of the managers I used to work with, he was the office next door to me. He came to me one day. I'd moved jobs, he'd moved jobs. And he said to me, I really need your help. He said, will you be a character witness for me? And I said, sure. Why? What's happened? And he said, I made a bit of a mistake, he said, and I think, you know, things have got really serious. So I said, okay, let's get together. We got together, said, tell me what the situation is. And he said, I was presenting to an audience and I was talking about this thing that was an issue, and I said, you've got to be able to find the nigger in the woodpile. Now, that, by the way, guys, if anyone doesn't know, is an old engineering phrase that may have been acceptable many years ago. May have been, right? But he'd used that phrase, and he just carried on like nothing had happened. And at the end of the session, there was a black guy in the audience came up to him and said, I'm offended by what you said. And he didn't even know what he'd said. Now, the guy I'm talking about is a lovely guy, right? He's a genuinely nice person. I never would have thought he was racist or anything. But the phrase he used, and that N-word, is not something that is acceptable. You and I worked for an American company, right? It's absolutely not acceptable in the American world. So net, he got removed from the company, right? He had a great career. He got downgraded and he got removed from the company, right? Wow. Because it was that serious, because this person said they were offended by it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just an expression that was around in those days.
In those days, right?
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
But if we think about it now, Neil, would we ever consider using that phrase today? No. So the world's changed, right?
Yeah.
The world's changed, and for the better.
For the better.
The world's changed for the better in the main, right?
Yeah.
So we need to say, leaders coming through now, well, leaders in existence already, you need to realize things that may have been acceptable before are not acceptable today for the right reasons. So you need to change, right? Leaders wanting to come today into leadership, people wanting to come into leadership today, that's what you're coming into. You need to be aware, you need to be respectful, you need to be on point to handle these things because it's part of your agenda. Right?
Yeah, and I think so it's kind of wrapping this up. I think if you're, as a leader watching this, the takeaway would be conscious of it. Have a look at your business and go, have we got a balance of ethnic people in this business? And if you're not sure what the balance should be, look on the government website. I mean, I'll put the links in the notes below, just so that people can go to those government websites and have a look. So be conscious of it. If you see it, don't ignore it, and enable conversation around it. Don't be scared about the conversation. I think those would be the comments. So, and there's value to it. There's value to making sure you've got that diversity.
And any company of substance would have a decent HR department. Maybe it's not called HR, maybe it's called something else, right? But there'll be a department that's there to support you and help you and play out to the company values and to what's right? Use them. They're there to help you. So if you're not sure, ask, right? Yeah. You're not on this journey on your own.
Correct, yeah. So we happy to wrap up there?
Yeah, sure.
So I think, it was a bit of a contra. I wasn't sure talking about this topic, how it would be, because we'd never talked about it before. So I think we've uncovered and had a good conversation there about a number of areas with this. So thanks for, being so open and having this conversation. Any final thoughts you want to add?
The thoughts that come to my head, Neil, is this has got to be something where people have got their own views on it, because we've just listened to the views of two people sitting here. I'd love to hear those views from other people, right? Whatever they are, whether you want to support what we've said, whether you want to challenge what we've said, or whether you want to give us an alternative, or whether you want to offer to come and talk with us, right? Because we will need to create a panel or a discussion. But guys, please give us a comment.
This is our view and what we know from our experience and background.
Exactly.
So listen, thank you everyone for watching. Thanks for another episode, Albert. Thanks for great input today as well.
Really good.
Please thumbs up below. Please subscribe so that you get notified. This will be on the Leadership Detectives channel now, so you might have to resubscribe if you were watching it on a different channel. But look forward to talking to you next week.
All the best, guys. Have a great weekend. Enjoy.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.